welcome back to the Elder Law Out Loud podcast. I'm Carla Ray, a business development manager here at Family First Firm, Florida's largest elder law firm, and I'm here with the CEO and founding attorney, Geoff Hoatson, once again. And today we are going to be talking a little bit about what sets elder law attorneys apart from the pack, because I will meet with clients, potential clients, who say, well, I can have my cousin Eddie do the trust for me.
Sure.
What's the difference between doing, a specialty elder law attorney and just hiring anyone to prepare your estate plan or Medicaid plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, we live, I'll say unfortunately or fortunately, we live in an age of specialization. And, you don't go to your general family practitioner to have brain surgery done. You don't get financial advice from your mechanic. We kind of have things that we specialize in, and
Unless you have a really good mechanic.
unless you have a really, yeah, your mechanic's just killing it, maybe, but even then,
It's a front business or something else.
that's it, yeah. But most people aren't saying like, ooh, what am I going to do for retirement? I better talk to my mechanic.
Yeah.
In general. It's that way also when it comes to the legal industry. Yes, when we go to law school, we can basically do anything, right? It's not like medicine where you have to go into specialized residency. Practically, once we get out, we tend to work in a particular area under an attorney we learn from and kind of go through almost a residency where we learn that particular area. But ultimately, you have people who, if you're talking about lawyers who are more generalists, maybe you're solo practitioners, maybe they, represented you in a divorce or your kid's DUI or something like that. They may have worked at a big firm years ago, and they were maybe had to do wills and trusts or something like that, 15, 20 years ago. And they're like, the law probably doesn't change. It does. And, in those cases, we oftentimes see lawyers who aren't specialists in this stuff prepare documents that are not in compliance with our laws now. The most common is the power of attorney, which I know you run into quite frequently.
People think they can get a power of attorney off the internet and
Yes.
it will cover them for everything that they need to do.
Unfortunately, that is the case. Yeah, and unfortunately, that doesn't actually happen. It doesn't work. A lot of times I tell people the power of attorney is worth what you paid for it, which in a lot of cases is nothing because they got it for free off the internet. Back in 2011, here in the state, we had some major changes to our Florida state statutes related to powers of attorney. And the legislature said, hey, these things are pretty complicated. There's a lot, if you see our powers of attorney here in Florida, they tend to be 20, 30 pages if they're done well. If you could go up to New York and get a one-pager, and it's totally fine. We just have very different laws here. And the legislature said, look, these things are pretty complicated down here, so we don't want people just signing the end of a 30-page document. How do we know if they read it? They gave somebody the ability to give away their money. That's a big issue.
Yeah.
But we don't know if they've read that through this 20 or 30-page document. So they changed it and they said, hey, we want you to see initials next to some of these, what they call special powers. The legislature just kind of defines some powers like, naming beneficiaries, gifting your money away, creating trusts or estate planning tools, those sorts of things. Like, we want to see that you actually intended for this person to be able to do that. We don't just want a signature on the document. So we want that person to actually initial each of those powers. We never see that on, I shouldn't say we never see that. It's rare that we see that from anything online. And even when we do, oftentimes it's not actually the right powers that need to be initialed, that have the initial marks next to it. It's kind of a big issue because then those documents aren't valid. And the thing that sucks is that person may not have the ability to make decisions anymore. Mm-hmm. So they when they did, the person thought like, I'll just do this on the cheap. Then that's great. No big issues. But now it's too late to update it, and what they have isn't worth anything.
And if they've lost capacity or, they're in a medical state where they can't make decisions, that becomes a really big deal.
It is. Then you're looking at guardianship.
Yeah.
And, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's a giant headache. The way that the legislature is looking at guardians and guardianship is just with I'll say a very negative slant or negative view, and they're making it a lot more difficult for people to serve as guardians or making it difficult for lawyers to practice guardianship. I've made no secret of the fact that we're moving out of the practice area because the legislature and judiciary are just making it very difficult to continue to do it in any way that really compensates us for the amount of work that goes into it.
You mentioned New York as an example. I feel like we always go back to New York because we get so many people who move here to Florida from New York and they think that their documents are fine. But there are some other states that have hefty POAs in place. I saw one yesterday actually from a client who came to us, had one done in Ohio.
Sure.
And now her stepfather has since lost capacity. So she wanted to make sure that what she had in place gave her the authority to come and meet with us, to pursue Medicaid on his behalf. And it did. It had those special powers listed out. How do you know from state to state what's going to work when you move?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if we move back and look at the Constitution and the amendments, there's the full faith and credit clause that basically means like if something's valid in that state, it's valid in this state. And that's always created some issues over the years. You go back to things like gay marriage, where it was legal in some state and not the other. Well, technically, the state where it isn't legal is supposed to recognize it, but then they refuse. So there's been kind of a tenuous issue, I guess, there over the years. When we get to these types of like, hey, are the documents from there good here? Generally, the answer is from a legal perspective, yes. Generally. Now, there are problems that you may see with like a will or trust that may direct that a piece of homestead property is sold and the proceeds are distributed as a part of like a probate process than a will, for example. The problem with that is our homestead property has unlimited homestead protection or unlimited creditor protection in the state of Florida. So that means you could owe, I don't know, $1 million to creditors. You could owe the state money, and they can't touch your property, right? So you can still get that homestead to your loved ones. Where you run into issues is that's not true of the proceeds of a sale. So if you have a property that you give to your children, great, they take it. The creditors, excuse me, the creditors can't come after it. But if you have a property in the probate process and you direct that it's sold, well, now all of a sudden, all those proceeds that are now in the probate, those are accessible by new creditors. So that may be a reason that you'd want to update those sorts of documents from a legal perspective. But generally, like I was saying, the issue is a practical perspective. And from a practical perspective, if you give a power of attorney from out of state to someone here at like a local credit union, they look at it and they're like, well, I don't know if this is legal. I'm not going to accept it. And then what's your option? Your option is suing them to accept it. So you got to go find a lawyer, pay them. You have to file a suit against this bank or send a demand letter first and hope that they, do the right thing and honor the power of attorney. But like, who wants to jump through those hoops?
Right.
So from
Just get a new power of
yeah,
attorney.
right. Get one that people recognize, when it's here. So that's kind of the feedback that I have. Normally when there's a lot of additional requirements that we have on our documents here in Florida. When people bring documents from out of state, you probably want to update. Those requirements that we have tend to be like overkill in most other states. So I always tell people, when you take our documents to other states, it's normally okay. They're like, why is your power of attorney 30 pages? You're like, well,
It's very thorough.
yeah, very thorough. You're like, well, is it not valid? Well, no, it's valid, but it's just so much. Okay, great. It still works, right? Yeah, it feels like a lot, and maybe people are like scratching their head, but it still works. But that's the issue where you bring stuff here, it becomes a little more challenging.
Yeah. And going back to the issue of elder law firms versus other specialty firms,
Sure.
even those who do, say, family law that may have, wills and trusts under their umbrella, they don't necessarily know the Medicaid side of,
Right.
of our practice. I've run into that where, folks have gotten advice from those family law attorneys
Oh, for sure.
that may not actually be accurate to what they need to do in order to protect their assets for the purposes of Medicaid. So can you talk a little bit about that particular specialty that we have here?
Yeah, of course. So, the example I probably use, I had a phone call last night with a client, and she was coming to us to talk about updating her trust. Looked through everything, and in the course of our conversation, she said, well, assuming there's much less left, I know how much, long-term care costs. I said, well, we do have a different type of trust you might be interested in exploring. It's called our Family Fortress, and it's designed to protect against creditors, lawsuits, elder exploitation, probate, of course, like all trusts do, but also long-term care expenses. I said, this might be something. She has a daughter who has special needs, had a significant medical event when she was younger and isn't able to work, and she's on government benefits. She wants to make sure, because she's providing a lot of financial support for that daughter, she wants to make sure that there's still money there to take care of her after she passes. But she's really worried about losing this money as she gets older, because as we know, the number one threat to your wealth is your health as we get older. So, I talked with her about this, and she was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because now I'm kind of I'll say guaranteeing, obviously we can't use that word as lawyers, but in her mind, she sees it as definitely increasing the likelihood that there's going to be a lot of money left that then she can provide for this daughter who has special needs. If you talk to a lawyer at a family law firm, or maybe even some more just traditional estate planning lawyers, they may not know the rules around Medicaid and know how to do that sort of planning to ensure that not only can you protect it from all these other risks, but you can also protect it from what is oftentimes a devastating long-term care expense. As elder law attorneys, that's what we focus on. Is when you get older, there are a lot of different ways that you can be financially, ruined. The nest egg is gone. And so we really work to prevent those things from happening, both on the planning side, and then, God forbid, somebody is in a crisis, then trying to help them through the crisis as well.
Yeah. One thing that we run into a lot are non-attorney
Sure.
entities that will say that they can get you qualified for Medicaid. It's not always that simple as dropping an application for somebody who needs long-term care Medicaid.
Yeah.
Explain the difference
Sure.
between going with a law firm
Yes.
that specializes in this and going with a planner.
Yes. So at the core foundation, planners cannot do anything to get you eligible for Medicaid. It is a felony for them to give you any advice on how to get eligible for Medicaid. It's considered the unlicensed practice of law. It is a third-degree felony. Now, people do it all the time, unfortunately. And, the Florida bar tries to do what they can to prevent this from happening. But ultimately, you have people out there who are committing felonies. Like, that's ultimately, call it what it is. They are criminals at this point who are given advice that they are not qualified to give. And that's really what it boils down to. The Florida Supreme Court back in 2015 found that there were all these non-attorneys giving all this advice out there and basically just ruining seniors and their financial legacies because they could just walk away from it. Didn't work. Sorry, too bad. Thanks for the $30,000 we charged you or whatever. You're gonna have to figure this out on your own. There's at least one non-attorney group that is led by somebody who lost all of their FINRA licensing and was prosecuted for exploiting seniors. And now that person has a company doing Medicaid planning focused on seniors. It's interesting, and the Florida bar tries to do things, but it's kind of like whack-a-mole. Like another one pops up, and they do what they can. But there's a lot of people out there doing this stuff, and unfortunately, they're giving very questionable advice. And like I said, they're literally committing crimes just by doing what they do. All they are allowed to do is file an application. That's it. At the core, Medicaid planners can file applications, and that is it. Anything about getting eligible from an income or an asset perspective has to be done by a lawyer.
So what are they just farming that out to attorney groups, or?
In some cases, yeah, I think they probably are, which in and of itself is kind of strange. It really ought to make you wonder, what sort of legal advice you're getting. Because at the end of the day, I can't imagine being like, hey, I don't do, because that's the other piece of it is when you run into these people, they're always working with lawyers who don't really bill themselves as elder law attorneys. You can't really find them out there doing anything. If you go to their website, it's not clear about what they do. And these are the people who are doing the elder law planning for you. Now, I will be very candid. What I expect is probably happening. The planner says, hey, here's what we're going to do on this case. The attorney says, yep, sounds good. Now, of course, no attorney would ever admit that, because then they're going to say, oh no, that was my advice. Of course, I obviously can't prove this, but it's what I expect is probably happening, because these people are not elder law attorneys. So what you have then is a planner with a very limited skill set who is not at all familiar with all the different areas or different strategies we have to get people eligible for Medicaid. They've got these like 3 things that they do, and they just go to the same attorney and say, hey, we're going to do this on this one. He goes, perfect, sounds good, cool. Now we have a lawyer giving legal advice. It's a farce. Unfortunately, it's something that's just it's doing a disservice to the clients, and it's putting them in much worse situations.
Yeah, and how do they prevent that? Because I'm thinking about, all of my grandparents are gone, but when they were still with us, they were not the most savvy when it comes to, researching licenses and any prior complaints for whatever agency would regulate something like this. So how does one protect themselves?
Yeah, that's truly the scary thing is there is no agency that regulates these non-attorney planners. So they're just out there. I mean, literally, our viewer, whoever that is, could be a non-attorney Medicaid planner.
We probably have some of those.
We might have
Trying to
some
see what
people. Yeah, I think what
what
we're
we're
talking
what
about.
we're talking about.
But the average person who has no experience with this has all the qualifications and credentials to be a Medicaid planner because there are none. There's no regulatory body. If you screw up, you walk away. Is there errors and omissions policies? Of course not. So it's a really kind of scary situation because people don't realize that they have no recourse. They're just hoping that because this person may be charged a little bit less, that it's commodity, it's the same thing, and it's not. I mean, like when I was training one of our attorneys early on, I was like, there's a lot of right answers out there, but what you're looking for is the best answer for this client, and that's how we work on this because there's a lot of things you have to factor in: tax implications, loss of control, liquidity, how long the assets may be locked up, or income streaming sorts of things. So even spouses at home who might need income. There's so many factors that play into this. You need to take all these different variables and figure out, well, what's going to be the best for you based on all of this.
Mhm.
And that's what people just don't get when they're going to these non-attorneys. So it is a kind of a scary situation because they don't have credentials, they don't have licensing, they don't have insurance, they don't have anything to protect our clients. And in a lot of cases, people end up in not great situations. And probably the scariest thing about it is that in a lot of cases, people don't even know. They don't know that maybe the $50,000 they lost in taxes, they didn't have to because they didn't talk to someone like me
Mhm.
who could have figured out a strategy to still get them Medicaid while still protecting them and not losing all that money.
Yeah, I think that is the worst part about it is even the documents that they carry with them to advertise their business. The average person may not know the difference between a
Oh,
planner
yeah.
and an attorney.
They do the best they can to make it look like they're a law firm.
Mhm.
Then at the bottom, there's like a little text that says, "We're not a law firm. We're
Yeah,
not lawyers." But yeah,
non-attorney advice.
there you go. Yeah, that's right. So I mean, it's definitely designed to mislead the customers. And truly, I think at the end of the day, the first question needs to be, "Are you an attorney?" And if they're not, I don't see why you should stay there because the only advice you can legally get is from an attorney. So why would you waste your time with somebody who's not a lawyer and will never be?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
For you, what drew you to this area of law? There's many things that
Yeah.
you could do.
Um, just all the things I've seen in my family's lives. I mean, my grandparents, and there's a video online you can find about this, but it talks about all the mistakes that my grandparents made throughout their lives, and specifically as they aged. There was elder exploitation by a neighbor. There was just some significant long-term care expenses on both sides. So both of my grandparents, both maternal and paternal. My mom's parents were the ones who were exploited. Thankfully, my dad's parents never were. But my dad's mother did get in a car accident kind of later in life when she was going over to see her husband in the nursing home, and she got sued, and there were some financial issues there. That grandfather, my dad's had the one with the Alzheimer's from very, very young, who was in the nursing home. He was accidentally disinherited by his father. Basically, his father got remarried later in life and unintentionally left everything to his new wife, his like deathbed wife, and so some of those issues, have truly changed the trajectory of my family. And I've learned about this area of law that could prevent that from happening to other people. Like I say, my stories don't have to be your stories,
Mhm.
And so that's the type of work that we do is to prevent those things from happening.
And while we're really, really good at elder law,
Mhm.
we admit when there are things that we don't
Oh,
specialize in.
yeah.
Litigation. I mean, these are the types of things that you want to seek a specialty
Yeah.
practice for.
Absolutely. Like I say, we live in an age of specialization, and I believe in just doing a few things and doing them well. So we do three things. We do estate administration, which is like probate or trust administration. We do the planning side of that and the front end, the estate planning, and we do government benefits, really focused on Medicaid, and that's it. So we do three things. We do those three things well, and everything else we refer out to somebody else who can help.
Absolutely. I think it's a good reminder Again, going back to the analogy you drew about you don't go to your mechanic for financial advice.
Right.
Definitely want to seek out somebody who's an expert in the area that you need advice in.
That's right.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Elder Law Out Loud podcast. If you know somebody who could benefit from this information, go ahead and share this episode, and we'll see you next time.